There we go. Okay, so welcome. So this is the April extension authors call, even though it is the first week of May, because that's how we do things. The first thing on the agenda is, of course, introductions, and I'm already talking, so I'll go first. So Matt Hernandez, I recognize at least one of you from our call last month, but I'm a PM on the VS Code team. I work on Azure extensions and some of the marketplace relationships that we have going on. And every time that we have this call, I always hope to be able to show you something that we've recently published in the marketplace, and unfortunately things have just been blocked lately. So sorry about that. Yeah, so that's me. Any of the marketplace stuff, I'm a good person to go through for that. Extensions, I'm a pretty good person to go through for that as well. And next. How about Eric?
All right. Eric Amodio, I'm a dev on the VS Code team, create GitLens and a bunch of other extensions. Yeah, so just excited to kick off this second call here and build up this community. And later I'll be talking about the timeline API and the timeline feature that we recently shipped. So yeah, excited to be here. Prashant, you want to go?
Sure, yeah. Hey, I'm Prashant. I'm PM on the Visual Studio Marketplace team. Previously, I worked on the VS for Mac and the Xamarin team, so as a PM. So now, so we started a new team to work on a lot of the feature requests we are receiving on the VS Marketplace team. So if you have any features on the gallery and the VS Marketplace side, you could always you can email me or reach out to me. Yeah.
Okay.
Yuki, would you go next?
Okay. So I'm Yuki Ueda. So I am author of the VS Code R extension. So I'm interested about how will VS Code Marketplace and API will be growth in the future. That's it. So last is Preds Idos.
Right. Hi, so I'm Ido Perez. I'm an architect at SAP. We develop extensions for VS Code and other IDEs, and I'm just trying to represent some of our extension developers. Basically, this is it.
Am I the only one left?
Yeah.
I think so. Hi everyone, this is Anjali, and my room is not clean enough to turn on the video. So I'm from Intel. I am a PM for the Intel One API IDE team, and we just published 2 extensions to the VS Code Marketplace on that topic. And I'm here to get to know something about certain API roadmaps.
Okay, excellent. So welcome everybody. So the first thing, our main topic that we'd like to talk about is Eric wanted to show a walkthrough of the timeline view and some of the APIs. And then after that, we'll just have open discussion about anything that you guys need from us.
Yep, and actually, just before I dive into the timeline, I also just wanted to call out that we're also landing another big API feature. It's in its final stages this iteration, and then it'll be finalized next iteration, which is the custom editors API. We finalized the text-based version of that last iteration, and in theory, what's going to come out probably today, maybe tomorrow, is going to be the quote-unquote final. It'll still be proposed, but that's what we think is the final iteration for the binary custom editors API. And so if there's any feedback that the wider community, anyone has on that, please give your feedback as soon as you can, because we are going to finalize that for the next iteration. And changes will become far more difficult after that fact. So the more usage and eyes on that we can get, before the end of the next iteration will help us greatly. So yeah, definitely check that out. It's a very, very powerful feature. Just, very quickly, it basically allows you to, for a document, binary file, or, text file, to provide your own editing experience of that file. So, you can do very rich things, on top of that. You can provide an image editor, on top of image binary. You can, in GitLens, I'm going to be shipping a rebase editor. So like on top of the rebase file, you can actually have a UI on top of that. So there's a lot of powerful things that can be done there. I'm sure our Azure extensions will have like UIs over configuration files, stuff like that. That's very powerful. So definitely check it out. But yeah, let's dive into the timeline API and the timeline feature. Share here. All right, so if you haven't seen, let me turn off. We have a new timeline API. New timeline view. And so basically, the idea of the timeline view here is, given a particular file resource, you can provide a time series events for this. The only one we ship in the box right now is, providing Git history. So you can see here, of this file, the changes that have been made. You can click on them and show diffs, whatever information here. And so again, this is a proposed API, but any extension, once this ships, will be able to provide their own timeline provider. You'll get a URI, and then you provide that information, and it will show up in this timeline. And you can, just walk back through history and see, the time for that. You can also invoke timelines from, if you want to look at a timeline of a specific file, you can open them there. They're pinned. You can unpin it, and it will go back to just following whatever file is active. And then, in the sources here, like we have Git history. One is the one included by default. I'm running an extension I wrote last night for just showing Twitter timeline, just to try to, get this. And of course, it's not working right now. Demo fail already. Let me open this up. While it's just working. I hope I didn't get rate limited. It could be the problem. All right, well, while that sits here, let me just dive into what this sort of looks like. So basically the API here is set up very similar to our other provider-based APIs. Let me just collapse a bunch of this stuff here. So we have this new timeline API. So you would register a timeline on a workspace. You provide the scheme. You could also provide star for your scheme if you just want to respond to all URIs. But you can provide a scheme or list of schemes that you want to listen to, whether they may be file-based or some other format. And then you provide your timeline provider. And a timeline provider basically has a few things. It's got its ID, which is just a unique identifier for your timeline, a label that shows up in the UI, a change event, so you can signal when new events get introduced into your timeline. So you can send a change for that to happen. And then the main thing is that we're going to call in asking for your timeline. So we would give you a URI, a set of options for how we're querying, cancellation token, and then you give us back a timeline object. And please feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have any questions. I'll probably go through this a little bit quickly, and then we can sort of dive in any other questions. And so basically the timeline API here, you would return, the main thing is your list of timeline items. And then there's an optional to deal with paging. So, with many services or many APIs, you'll want to be able, you want to page this timeline data because you're not going to return, the data for everything. So this provides an object back to say, this is the point that you've fetched up to. And so then when we call you next time, we can give you back this cursor, and then you can give us the next set of data. So this cursor is defined by the extension. It's just basically however you want to control, telling us that this bit of information that you've given us, use this key to get the next set. So if you've seen any database paging cursor-based stuff, it's very similar to that, but it could be used in any way. It's just a string identifier. It could be a timestamp. It could be an ID. It could be whatever you want. But so the next time we call you in this, with these options, we'll give you back that cursor to say, give us the next set. And then the other piece of it is when we call into you, we give you this in this options here. We'll give you a limit. So, it'll either be a limit saying, hey, only give us 20 items, 100 items, whatever that may be. And so then you could return only that amount. Or the limit could be, hey, give us up to this timestamp or ID. And the ID is sort of optional because the ID is optional based on what you provide. So like if you give us timeline items with IDs, we'll give you that ID back. If you don't give us timeline items with IDs and they only have timestamps, then you'll just get the timestamp. Every timeline item is required to have a timestamp. That's how they're shown. That's how they're ordered in the timeline view. But IDs are optional. But if you give us both, you'll get them both back. And so it's just basically providing a way to say, hey, fetch up to this point so that we can get a whole set back. So it's either a number or that. We also do use this limit because this is sort of like how far back to fetch. So when we want to actually fetch newer items, so like if you say, hey, you fire the timeline change event saying that the timeline has changed, we could come back and say, okay, we're not going to give you a cursor because we want newer things because we're not going back in time, but we'll limit you to we'll say only give us up to the most recent ID we already have. So you'll just be asking for the most recent things. In the abstract, this is probably a little bit confusing, but as we dive into the actual example, hopefully it'll crystallize a little bit better. But I just want to dive into the timeline item itself. So it has a timestamp, which is just number of milliseconds time. A human readable label. That's what will get shown in the timeline. An optional ID. Again, that ID is used for just correlation. And also disambiguation too. So like, if you happen to give us the same timeline item multiple times, because like if you're querying, you may be inclusive in some times. If your things have IDs, we'll clean up and replace those IDs so that, only one thing with that ID will be left in the actual timeline. And that's also, you'll want to use IDs, especially if you have an item that needs to update or change. Let's see, then an icon, which is basically just like our tree provider. You can provide a URI or use one of the theme icons. A description, which is that sort of like we render less prominent, and I'll show you in the UI. Well, I can show you actually in the UI here, basically what that looks like. And of course, I'm on you just run.
Is everybody familiar with the proposed APIs and what this file is that Eric is showing?
Well, the proposed APIs, yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, because normally our APIs are in our VS Code d.ts, and this is the proposed one. So these are where our proposed APIs live until they get finalized and moved over. Also, if you don't know, there's a VS Code -d.ts, -dts npm package you can run with npx, which will actually make it very easy to pull down the latest proposed API into your project. So it'll actually pull this file directly into your project. So it's documented on the, if you look on, in go to visualstudio.com and look at I always click on that one, API, and just search for using proposed APIs. You'll see here, some information about it, and then the client utility. I honestly didn't know about this utility until very recently, so definitely wanted to call that out. It's very helpful for pulling in those APIs. But yeah, so you can see here just different pieces. So there's the icon, there's the label, this is the description, and then the timestamp gets rendered here. And yeah, those are the sort of pieces there. The detail is what gets rendered in the hover and basically the tooltip. And then the command, just like tree items, you provide the VS Code command that should get executed when you click on an item. So like here with the Twitter one, I have it. If you click on it, it opens up the tweet on the web. And the last one is, again, it's the same as the tree item. You give it a context value. The context value is basically just a key that you define that allows you to assign commands for right click. So that you can have your own menus and commands associated with that, and you can key off of that. And I can show more. I don't have any right clicks or commands set up for this test, but yeah. So that's basically the surface area of the API. In here, so this is the whole extension. It's not very long. First we get our standard activation, and I just basically create this new timeline. So in here we implement the timeline provider. You set your ID. So I'm just picking my own ID. The label is Twitter timeline. You can see that that's what shows up in here. Then you have your change event. And so basically, to get things set up, I register I'm listening for all URIs. So it's the star. And then I'm providing this registration, and I have one command that I'm just registering that is open item, and then it's going to call my open method. And I just have a little sort of hack in here of a set timeout every 30 seconds. It's going to say that the timeline changed, and that will cause us to requery to ask for the most recent item. So basically every 30 seconds, it'll ask this provider to give its information. So you may notice that new things might show up in this timeline if there's new tweets in my timeline. And then this is just the Twitter specific stuff. So basically the meat of it is this provide timeline method. So in here, I'm just calling out to Twitter, getting this set of tweets, and I'm using the options that have come in to depend on how many I want. So if options is a number, then I'm saying I'll get that many tweets. The Twitter's API is basically very similar in that you have like a since ID. So you want to get everything since a point in time, and then a max ID. So basically I'm using the cursor that I'm providing to be the max ID. So that's how the point in time in history. And then the since basically is if the limit object excuse me, if the limit is an object, then I'm using the ID from that limit so that I can just get from that point. So it's getting my set of tweets, converting these tweets into a timeline item that I've defined. So this is just extends from timeline item, takes in that from Twitter, and just massages the data into what the timeline wants. So it's going to, create a label. It's going to get the timestamp for it. Sets up the, the IDs comes from the tweets and sets up all the description, icons, and command. And so here's where I'm setting up the command to call my command open, and then passing in the argument for this timeline item. And then basically here, this is one, this is kind of a bug right now that I'm working around here. So like if we're basically fetching more recent things, so, if there's no cursor and I've given an object here, means I'm asking for the most recent, means VS Code is asking to give me the most recent objects, most recent things in the timeline. Anything more recent than, is in this limit. So in that case, we just don't want to return the paging, and ultimately you won't have to worry about this because even if you did return paging here, this wouldn't break things, but there's a bug in VS Code that I just fixed last night that causes this an issue because we'll clear the cursors. But you return your items, and then sort of the same thing here. If we have any items, we'll return a cursor that is basically the last item's ID in the list. And then this is just error handling. So so basically as this comes through, we could even step through it. So if I see here, if I refresh the first time through, you'll see the options object is just a limit of a number. So it's just asking, there's no cursor, and it's just saying, give me the 20 most recent things for this particular URI. So then we'll go in. Why my skips are not working, but since I'm running a modified version right now, I'm not in my normal dev environment, so and I haven't set up my skips. All right, so all right. So again, first time we'll get 20 items, and then you'll see come on. Yeah, I think I got rate limited again. This is one of the problems with using Twitter's API. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. But basically, yeah, that first time, and I could switch to, but that first time through, it's going to say, okay, just the options of 20. That if I go and ask for the next page, it's going to just say the same thing, limit of 20 with the next with the cursor, and then every time you click load more, it's just going to keep going back through that. So like if I open. Let me just turn off that. So basically same thing, so when I would click load more here, we're doing the same thing to the Git provider. It's just gonna, say the cursor is sort of at this commit and just give me those next 20. And then same thing, give me those next 20. And then, if the Git changes, gets a little different, and the timeline API is set up to be flexible. So depending on how you return this event, how you fire this timeline change event depends on exactly what will be done. So you can say that you can basically say you can provide no timeline change event and just fire the event and provide no payload, and that basically will tell VS Code, hey, everything about this timeline change, drop all your caches and re-request from like 0. Or you can provide this timeline change event object. You can say that it's for this particular URI, and then so it'll basically, if you don't provide reset, it will just refresh that API, just refresh, ask for the most recent things on that URI. So you send that event, and then we'll call you saying, okay, give us the most recent stuff for that. If you provide reset, we'll say, okay, we're going to call you, give us the most recent stuff plus up to the point we have that we know about, because you've said that it changed, and we should sort of reset everything, but we want to keep visually this, what the user has seen and grabbed before. So we'll ask you to provide that whole set. And again, these are sort of guidelines. If it doesn't match, the UI will adapt in it appropriately, but to be ideal, right, we want to try to restore what was there before. And the reset flag, hopefully won't normally need to be used, because a lot of things like in a lot of cases your timelines are immutable. They're just moving forward in time. And so if that's the case, you don't need to use reset, because the timeline's just moving forward. But in the case of Git or other things where history is actually mutable, that's where we need this reset flag, because if somebody does a rebase, or something changes, or they reset a commit, or or just resets back to a few commits, like now that timeline for that file could be very different. And so that's really what the reset comes into, is that, hey, this timeline has changed and what you have is not valid anymore. So it's really used for that mutable history. But yeah, so that's the basics of it. Let's see if this will actually show up now. I'm still rate limited. Yeah, it's still rate limited. But the other thing I did want to mention is these timelines become intermixed. Right, so it's just a time series. So like when the Twitter was up, you'll see that this last commit was from a day ago. So Twitter's going to sort of dominate the timeline, because there's been a lot of tweets that have happened earlier than a day ago. So you might have to get back further in history before you might see these events coming in, and so the timeline will aggregate all these together and then only show you up to points in time where we have, like, across all the timeline sources that you have enabled, we will show you up to that most recent point. So that way, as you load more and keep paging back, it's sort of a consistent experience. So that's all handled under the covers for you. And that's the bulk of the timeline API. I know there's, from using it, from other feedback, there is definite still confusion exactly about what, how to use the cursor, what the limits really are. So I'm still, looking at feedback for, different terminology or different ways of structuring that to make it a little bit more clear how VS Code is going to call the provide API, and how different timelines should respond. And then one of the other things I did want to call out that working on too is, right now, you'll notice that this URI is sort of like a defined, like it has to be there. But I'm also thinking about the ability of having a timeline that's not based on the file. It might just be general for the window, for the workspace. You can kind of do this. I mean, you can do this now, right? Like I'm doing with the Twitter. It's like I don't really care what the URI is. I'm just providing my timeline data. And for some things that might actually be fine to be intermixed with the files. It really depends on your type. But we want to provide, ideally some UI that will allow you to switch either the timeline view from file-based to the whole workspace or window, and then basically to be able to have those sort of more global activity feed, to fit into this same model. So I'm definitely exploring, what we would need to do to support that, both from the UI side of, how to make that happen, and the other. As you can see here, I got unrate limited, so now the timeline is back, and you can see them intermixed, right? So like my stage changes was from 2 minutes ago, and then a new tweet came in above that, and then these others are sort of dominating that. And so as we go back in history, we can go through and load that. Yeah, so I think that's it for me. Any questions?
Can I ask some things? How is adjust to the diagnostic APIs? Like in the timeline item has a label and detail and description that can be adjusted to the diagnostic, and that by adjusting diagnostic, it can be connected with the source code file and other icons.
Yeah, so when you're providing those items, you control of what is returned there for that tooltip, which is the details, the description, which is sort of like rendered less, and the label.
Also, the value name can be same with the other APIs value names.
Sorry, I'm not following that one. Can you repeat that?
Okay. Sorry, my English is not so good. So first about what I want to adjust to diagnostic API with the timeline history APIs timelines class. So timeline class has a ID and detail and tag a label. And diagnostic API has a code and message and tags. It looks complicated is between two different APIs. So it can be merged and it can be referred to each other's functions.
So what other API were you mentioning? The call hierarchy? Is that what you said?
No, about tag and code.
Not sure.
Diagnostic, if diagnostic has a tag about the Twitter, also the timelines item has a Twitter's label, it can be merged, right?
I'm not sorry.
Sorry.
Is anyone else,
after the meeting, maybe I will submit the message by cleaned English. Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Any other questions or thoughts or comments? All right. So I don't know if we just want to jump into the next section of sort of just general, feedback. I threw out this idea of, thinking about some smaller quality of life improvements that VS Code can do to improve the, developer, extension developer workflow, anything in there that would help out. And, I mean, there's the big things, and if you looked at the last authors call, we did touch on some bigger things, and some stuff there from marketplace things to unit testing, other experiential pieces. But yeah, definitely, I'm open to hearing anything. But I do want to come out with some things that we could actually address in ideally shorter term fixes or things that can help and make a difference. So yeah, I'll open up to anyone who wants to jump in.
Yeah, this is the juicy part. You can just literally anything that's bugging you, just let us know.
Yep.
Well, I can go first. Well, one of the biggest issues I feel we have when we're developing extensions is that we often try to understand the context of the project, and sometimes we don't always know if the user opened just a simple folder and there is some files in the structure of the history, for example, and sometimes there are many projects in this tree, and it's always hard for us to understand how we can recognize that it's a project or two projects, or I understand that usually we open the root folder on the project, but it's something that users not always do, and then we encounter some behavior where we try to figure out where is these resources. Not all technologies have package.json that you can recognize, for example. So sometimes it's hard to understand what is the context of a specific folder that the user uses. Is code in this folder, or is it like a metadata? Is it a project, or is it just a bunch of files? Do we have two projects here? So this is something that always very make us difficult. And in addition to this, so sometimes we want to have a context menu on the project explorer and offer the user specific things and options that he could do. For example, if it's his code folder, we want to offer some options to open like a web view or some sorts or other tool. If it's a folder that has package.json, for example, I know it's a Node project and I want to offer some tool, or if it has POM.xml, then I can't use this tool. So I really would like to understand the semantics of some of the folders and be able to offer context menus and also have the tools to understand what's in these folders. So usually IDEs have project notion and they have metadata about the project. For example, Eclipse have projects, or Visual Studio has project. When we don't have it in Visual Studio Code, sometimes it makes our life harder to get this context.
Basically like saying, not necessarily open multi-root workspace, but just opening a folder and sort of gleaning what type of stuff is in there.
Yeah, exactly. Because sometimes personally, I know to open the root folder, but not all of our users are experts on VS Code like I am. So they just open some folder and start working. And then we always need to guess what is the status of this folder. What is in this folder, or is it in the next folder inside, or is it Node project, or is it Java project? And by the way, if I will add a context menu on folder, it will appear on all folders, right? I don't have a way to understand what is in this folder specifically. So yeah.
You can, but it would be tricky because basically using that context values, you can set your own context for folders that you know where things are, and then have your commands only show up when those context values are met. But doing it on folder basis would not be simple. You basically have to like run a scan of the folder structure that you're looking for, find out what things are there, and then for each sort of like folder name, put keys in sort of a map that would, you could say, okay, well, this resource is this, look it up in this map in your commands when, and then so you could show this for all these different things, but it's definitely not trivial. And
okay, so yeah, I would be appreciate something more trivial, but by the way, I will also be very interested in seeing if I didn't fully understand your suggestions, so I would be happy to see something maybe offline later. You could show me something.
Yeah, if you for anyone, we have the VS Code community dev Slack. I don't know if you're already a member in there, but if you are, you could always reach out to me there, and I can walk through different ideas and possibilities for making that happen.
Right.
One of the challenges. I mean, it's a plus and minus, right? Like VS Code doesn't provide you a trigger point, like when the context menu is going to come up. Like that also has to be sort of pre-computed, but with these context values and what you can store in them, there's quite a lot of power in that. You just have to set up stuff beforehand, and then when the menus get activated, you can control what is shown. But I can definitely point you to a lot of different examples. GitLens does a bunch of crazy stuff in its menus as well to handle that.
Okay, great.
All right. Anything else from anybody else here on the call? And Prashant, I think you had some questions. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I had a quick one. What is the recommended support system for an extension? I mean, is it the GitHub repository or Stack Overflow? Or there's no recommended way? What does majority do?
So yeah, I don't know if there's anything that's particularly recommended, but I think GitHub issues are on the repository are probably the vast majority. I know for things that aren't open source, companies still open repos that are basically just for issue reporting for the extensions. There's been many of the ones that aren't open source still point their their extension to an open source repo that is usually just either documentation or just for issue tracking and reporting. And so I've seen that a lot as well.
I see.
Yeah, and then Eric also mentioned the Slack channel, the extension developer Slack channel. You're also welcome to reach out there. Yeah, that may be a good place.
Okay.
Cool. Okay, I have a few questions. So on the marketplace team, we are planning to enable publishing the beta or like pre-release versions of extensions. So I want to get a sense of like how you as our extension authors like dealing with distributing pre-release versions of your extensions. What's your strategy and what's your like wish list you want to see on the VS Marketplace?
Actually, our extension, we wanted it to be in beta, so we marked it as preview.
Mm-hmm.
Close enough, right?
Yeah. Right. So was that a public beta, or like did you experiment internally, or like some sort of dog fooding, and how did you go about like distributing that?
Internally, we just set up the V6 file somewhere. So we just shared and floated that V6 file around. We also did user experience assessment on based on installing that extension file. One hiccup we face there is that when you download a V6 file and double click, it tries to install it in Visual Studio instead of VS Code. So had to do some teaching there.
That's interesting.
Yeah. After that internal one, then we just marked it as so this is in a public beta right now.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So how are you like planning on to graduate that to a stable one? So are you like going to just rename it, or are you going to like create a new extension? And
In this case, at least our situation is a bit different because the extension is tied to a product which is also in a public beta stage. So once that product, which is distributed directly by Intel, moves to non-beta, then we'll just remove the preview label from the extension.
Interesting. So is this a product like Windows specific, or like is it allowed to like run installed on other platforms as well?
The extension or the product I'm talking about?
The product, like whole setup, is it a Windows only, or is like can be run on cross-platform?
It is cross-platform. This is Intel One API. I'm posting the link in chat. So it's basically a DPC++ programming. It's a bunch of, it's like a software suite. It's not really one thing. So the extensions we have published are, one is basically a sample explorer for all samples that are going to be under this umbrella. And the other one is for a kind of an entry point to Intel optimizers and analyzers.
Okay, yeah, I mean, this all sounds interesting and maps to the roadmap we have for VS Marketplace. So would you mind like if I reach out to you offline and get some more feedback on it?
Yeah.
Okay, that would be awesome. Yeah.
Cool. Ida, what about you? Do you have like a solution for publishing beta versions of your extensions?
Well, actually, we have two kinds of extensions. One is that we publish on the marketplace, and we don't have a lot of them. We will upload one big one today or on Monday. It's for Yeoman generators, wizard. It's I guess it's very cool if you look at it. And we don't have a beta program for this. We do test it internally. We just publish VSIX or to people that we want to use. The other way is basically we not only using VS Code, we also use TIA with internal landscapes that we have on the cloud. And there we have beta programs, but basically those are the same extensions. So we have the option to test them on the cloud for internal using customers.
Do you publish extensions for Visual Studio as well, or is this just VS Code and TIA?
We, at least at my part of the company, we focus on Visual Studio Code and on TIA. Yeah.
We have both actually, VS Eclipse and VS Code. 3 all of them.
Yeah. So do you see similar problems with the Visual Studio extensions as well, or are these problems unique with VS Code?
As I said, with Visual Studio, you could just double click and install that locally, right? I think ideally I would love to see a feature where you can just import an extension from a URL, and that URL could be internally sourced something. I don't know if VS has something like that.
Yep. Yeah, I do think they have some. You can host your own extension registry for VS, but that's something that's not available at the moment for VS Code.
I see. Yeah, with one extension, maybe investing in an extension registry wouldn't make sense for some people.
Yep.
So I have another ask. So one of the things that we often want to do is to have a pane with a UI that is a little bit more complex than a tree. So sometimes the tree is great, but sometimes we want to have a little bit more flexibility. So this is something we could do with the web view, for example, but there is no option right now to do it with a web view on a pane instead of a tree. But also other flexibilities like adding control somehow on top of the tree or on the bottom of the tree, somehow just to show the user a label that we want to instruct them to do something with this tree, or might help. So a little bit more flexibilities around the panes would be great.
Yeah, we got the same feedback.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying we got the same feedback, and in our instance, we wanted to add basically like a search icon on top of the tree. And we've done a bunch of user assessment studies also on how people interact with those trees, and we keep going back and forth on expanded trees and collapsed trees. It's a hard problem to solve without overloading the IDE with lots of UX overhead.
Yeah, there is an open request, and it's gotten bumped a few times. It had started work in the planning stages, but hopefully once custom editors winds down, we'll be hopefully starting to look into that. But it is bringing web views into the sidebar and just more flexible layouts of where. And it won't be just a sidebar; it can be the panel or the sidebar, because now the panels and sidebars are flexible. You could drag views in between both. So that sort of ability will hopefully be coming in the near future. Can't say when, but it is on the plan to allow for web views to be in the sidebar panel. But yeah, even just the idea of just more flexible options in the tree. It'd be great, if there's specifics that you would like to see in the tree, even just post them onto the author's call issue, and we can sort of synthesize those. For me, I've wanted, even just like a search box, like literally on the thing, or an entry box or something like that, or a details pane that's, specific to the item you're on. Stuff like that could definitely be interesting without really changing too much of the structure of the views. And because we do try to keep things limited in patterns, limited in things, so like things are consistent across views. But yeah, there's definitely things that could easily warrant expansion and changes there. So yeah, please put any feedback there, and we can sort of synthesize that.
Cool.
Great.
And we are at time. I want to be respectful of everybody's schedules. So we are at time. If you have any other feedback, like Eric said, please throw it in the issue, the extension authors call issue. Also in the Slack, or you have my email address. I think you have Eric and Prashant's email address. Feel free to email me. I'm happy to talk about anything. So yeah, thank you all.
Last thing I would just say too, if you don't mind, please just email us or send us your GitHub username and the extensions that you're working on with the marketplace links, because I'd love to post them on the issue of who participated, and sort of gives you an opportunity to sort of be there and people can see who you are, and sort of promote your extension on there as well. So if you can send that to us, I'll get that posted on the link when we post the video for this as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can just
Thanks,
respond.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of the day.
Bye.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.